Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of LMI Quick Thoughts. Very excited today to have two guests with us, both LMIers. We have Mark Day, who is LMI's Director of Growth in the Health and Civilian Market, and also the Acting Vice President for the Health and Civilian Market. Mark is the star of the show today. He has an incredible wealth of experience as a federal IT leader. He is former Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Integrated Technology Services at the General Services Administration. He also served as Chief Technology Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and he was a Deputy CIO and CTO and Director of Technology Operations and Planning at EPA. He's also served in other roles in academia and in the private sector. And we're also joined by Nick Romer, a colleague of Mark for many years. Nick is a principal and digital transformation practice lead for LMI. So this conversation is really centered around gleaning insights on how to successfully do enterprise IT deployment and digital transformation from the perspective of someone who had to do it in several different places within the federal government. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick. Nick, go ahead.
Thanks, Adam. So, Mark, we've had several of these conversations over the years, so I look forward to having this one with you. One of the things I've always appreciated is your ability to bring that broad perspective from your background to these challenges, and really the ability to look at these large challenges and quickly get to the heart of the issue. And with digital transformation, there's a pretty significant issue. I mean, studies show right now that there's a high percentage of IT modernization initiatives that fail or don't meet expectations. Currently, looking at the federal IT dashboard, over 60% of federal IT investments are at medium to high risk of not meeting objectives. That's a high number, and that's a lot of money associated with that. Why does this happen, Mark, and what does that look like?
Well, thank you, Nick. And yes, we've had many conversations around this, and I appreciate the chance to talk about this and share with the community. I think it's important to start with what you just said and define what do we mean by some kind of failure. It is a failure to deliver the results intended. And we talk about not being on budget, not being on schedule, but at the heart of it is we're not getting the results and the benefits intended on schedule, on budget, but it's the results intended that really is important. And it looks like we've all seen it. It looks like things like late discovery of requirements that delay the system. And so we have to delay a module or we have to delay the system. Help desk call volume explodes, driving up cost. Legacy systems are retained, CUF systems grow up. There's a myriad ways in which you see this failure, but all of it amounts to benefits not realized, cost savings not realized, improvements to the mission not realized. So why does this happen? Well, I think we step back and ask ourselves, what do projects consist of? Big transformations to little transformations to system developments all revolve around technology, process, and people. Now, some people will throw in a fourth or a fifth category, but I don't think anybody argues that these three pieces are very basic. The federal government, in my 25 years in the federal space, gotten incredibly good at technology deployment. We're much, much better than we were 25 years ago. We've gotten much better at process management. We are better project managers. We're better at DevSecOps. We've adopted Agile, ITIL principles, et cetera, et cetera. We're much better. You'll notice I left out people. Today, we still have an ad hoc approach to how we manage people through the process. How do the stakeholders go through the process with us? And is that failure to really have a systemic approach to how we manage the people part of the equation that is driving the failures? Some 70 to 80% of the failures are attributed to that. When you go and look at the studies that say, why do they fail? It's often either a people issue or what's called an organizational issue. An organizational issue is just a fancy way of saying a lot of people. And so it's a people issue. And how do we improve that is, I think, the question. And Nick,
I think that's fair, Mark. And I think anyone who's been in this business for a while really can relate to those examples and really see some of the challenges from a people perspective that's occurred. And with technology changes, and specifically those impacts on people, it can be significantly different. So knowing that it's a people issue and predominantly, there's high percentages relating to that, what can we do about it?
Well, that's a great question. And I want to take it from the perspective of the senior executive who owns a project and the project leader. I want to start at that level and think about that. And I want to suggest 4 things. One is extraordinarily careful stakeholder planning that plans not from the beginning, not just from the beginning, but throughout the life of a project. How are we engaging each stakeholder group? And I'm going to name off the 4 and then come back first and talk about each one. Second, welcome resistance. And I want to talk about why that sounds funny, but it is critically important that you welcome resistance. Third, give people some ownership. Give them a piece of the pie so that they feel like they own part of the solution. And fourth, how we go about training is critical. So let me go back to each of those 4. Stakeholder engagement. We tend to focus on, if we do it at all, we tend to focus on very important people in the process, and we have a very good plan about how we're going to talk to them. And sometimes we then talk about some stakeholder groups, users. But we don't go down in depth and look at, well, what do we mean when we say users? There's users who input the data. There's users who use the data that's been input by other people. There are citizens who get benefits from that system, that from which decisions flow. There are analysts who do other things. So there's a lot of different kind of users. Do we understand how this system is going to affect each of the different types of users? Do we have a plan to address their concerns throughout the life of the project? Critical element. Second, when I say welcome resistance, what I'm really talking about is the opposite of what is so easy to do, which is to be annoyed by resistance. Resistance is a natural state of events when people confront change. The science, behavioral science, evolutionary studies tell us humans are wired, frankly, in a rational way to say, here's a change, is it good? That's a rational question for people to ask. And they typically ask it in 2 fashions. Is it good for my mission that I'm trying to accomplish? And second, is it good for me? And we have to answer both of those questions. So on the mission side, federal employees are incredibly driven by mission. If you can give them a clear picture of how this change is going to improve the performance of their mission, that is a powerful motivator for them to say, how can I help? Because they are mission driven in their employment. But they're also rational about their own interest. What's in it for me? Is my job going to get better? Is my job going to get easier? Can I do my job in this new system? And I'll give you just one quick anecdote. Deploying a very large new system in an agency, everybody basically happy with it, happy that we got to the point of deploying an enterprise system in an area that did not have one previously. And then we discovered one group of people, a particular task went from 10 minutes to almost an hour. They were very unhappy because they couldn't do their job efficiently and effectively. And there's a lot of cynicism I know around federal employees, but let me tell you, they were very upset that they couldn't get their job done as well as they had in the past. It was derailing the implementation of that system, and it was going to be rejected if we didn't solve it. Well, we did solve it, but it meant we hadn't planned at a detailed enough level to recognize a particular set of needs and a particular set of users. So it's really important to get to that can I do my job with this system? Can you help people see the answer to that question? And the answer is not always yes, and you can't blow smoke. So sometimes you have to say, this is not the greatest answer for you. And what are we going to do about that, and how are we going to help them? So honesty in that part of the picture is important. Giving people some ownership. What do I mean by that? You come with the core idea. We're going to deploy this. We're going to change the business process in these 5 ways. You've got the core. Can you give people space to color in the lines? Can you have people help you define the implementation of the change, to help you plan the implementation of the change? And I'll give you a real live example of how that works. You're sitting in a meeting, collecting ideas from the stakeholder groups, and you're having a good engagement with them, good facilitation, and someone suggests something that you've already got in your plan. It's very easy to say, yes, we've got that in the plan, thank you. And frankly, treat it as, well, yeah, we thought of that. You've lost an opportunity to sell them. If we could say instead, well, thank you, that's a great idea. Why is that important to you? What part of that is important to you? At that moment, they can give you some detail about why that's important. That when you get to that inevitable budget crunch and you're deciding which things not to deploy because you don't have the money or the time, you can say, yes, we're going to keep that one because that person explained why it mattered to this part of the community. They explained why this implementation piece was important. It's a powerful tool to let people own it. And when they see their ownership, then they are likely to become advocates for the system, and they can help you rather than hinder you in making progress. And finally, I mentioned training. We think of training as imparting knowledge to the trainees, but in reality, we want trainers who are practiced in active listening and who are listening for the defects. When 5 people in the class say, how do I do? And no one has an answer for how you do that with the new system. Or everybody in the room struggles with a particular function of the system. It's time for that trainer to bring that back to the development team and say, here's something we've either missed, here's something we can do better. And so you fix it before deployment, or you fix it in the first version, and you're able to say to people, yes, we know we have this thing, we're going to get it fixed in the first version. Each of these 4 practices will dramatically improve the ability to get people on your side, moving forward, helping you make a success out of this transformation.
Got it. Thanks, Mark. And I think the idea of the posture around welcoming resistance really resonates with me, and I can appreciate that, as well as giving ownership beyond that core requirement that you have and the core outcome you're looking for. So let's take a step back for a second. You mentioned before around the systematic approaches to this issue. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. If you think about the improvements we've made in technology and process, we've taken systematic, proven principles and applied them in a regularized manner. PMP being an example where we brought the Project Management Institute's basic concepts and we apply them generically. Agile principles, DevSecOps. We bring a systemic way of thinking about the issue. There is science behind behavioral science. We know a lot of things about why people resist. We know what principles will work. So can we build a systemic approach to how we do this work so that we're not just doing these 4 things isolated, we're actually doing them as part of a program? I think most people have heard of change management. They know that that's a process that helps you manage people across the gap from awareness to final sustainment. I'd like to think of adoption management as going one step further and saying, how do we move people from that moment of awareness and questioning and resistance to actual adoption and having people say, yes, I want to help. And that process can be put in a systematic way, and it can be deployed in a way that helps you get in front of the problems, anticipate the risk, anticipate the stakeholder needs, understand the different types of deployments. The stakeholder needs are going to be different when it's an RPA implementation for an acquisition office versus a cloud implementation for an existing system. The people affected are different. The problems they encounter are different. And so you can do this in a systemic way that makes you faster, quicker, and it means you deliver the benefits sought on time, on schedule.
No, thanks a lot, Mark. I certainly appreciate that. Looks like we're about out of time. I'll hand it back over to Adam.
Just, really quick, Mark, you mentioned, that there is science behind why people resist. We got a comment from Ashley who asked if you could talk about the types of resistance that you see in digital transformations. How would you answer Ashley's question?
Sure, there's many different types of resistance. So most of us are familiar, those of us who've worked in federal government are familiar with passive aggressive resistance. By that, I mean the person who just simply doesn't show up for the requirements meeting, and they own a piece of the requirements and they don't show up for the meeting because they don't believe this change is in the interest of the government. And so they don't come, and you don't understand that problem or that requirement that needs to be put into the system. That's a tremendously easy way for someone to resist. Or someone says, I just put the minimum data in that's required, and I don't really fill out everything else that's not required. And so the data that's collected is not the entire set of data needed to do the job. There's a lot of different ways people can be very subtle in resisting, or they can go to the boss and complain, I can't get my job done with this system. I'm delayed. And that's a real problem. Pretty soon, if there's enough of that, the bosses all start to ask, why are we deploying this system? It's making my workforce less efficient. There's 1,000 ways people can resist, or a finance officer who says, I'm not putting you in the budget. So there's lots of forms of resistance.
That's a great answer. And you mentioned a few things that I had not really thought about before. Putting in the minimum answer, for example, for a requirements, document. That's really fantastic insight. We are running a little short on time, so I think we're going to end up continuing this conversation in the future for sure. Thank you both Mark and Nick for joining us. We always like to promote our next LinkedIn Live. Next week, we are going to feature the first in our installment of Ask the Admiral series with LMI's Sink Harris, retired Rear Admiral from the U.S. Navy. He's going to share some of his insights on leadership and invite all of you to come ask your questions to Sink. He's a fantastic speaker and motivator. So with that, hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.